2, 3.
Cause I'ma dig deep, I'ma stand tall. I got the grit of the underdog. I'm stronger than you think, I can do this on my own. There's a difference between loneliness and doing this alone.
Hi, this is Daniel Warren Hill. Welcome to the DC Music Rocks podcast, presented by Capital Groove Collective, elevating the sound, voices, and music of the DMV to the world stage, one conversation at a time. Here we will highlight the widely talented DMV musicians that we believe are paving the way in the Washington metropolitan area through diversity of genre, gender, identity, and community. Today, we are talking with Nick Springer of Mahogany Bees. He released 9 new songs in 2020 via Bandcamp. So if you're trying to get caught up with all of the music that Nick puts out, you can find him at mahoganybees.bandcamp.com. How you doing, Nick?
I'm doing very, very good. Thank you so much for having me on today.
Hey, it's really a pleasure. We mentioned this in our green room moment, but the DMV music scene, all the artists are very gracious, and whenever anybody expresses interest in the music that the artists are creating, they're very flattered.
Yeah, and I mean, you can try to drum up as much support as you can online and through various outlets, but honestly, I find the biggest support comes from the boots on the ground. So anyone local, anyone who actually goes to the shows, anyone who actually knows the artists and the musicians, those are really the people that get things moving. So it's you all that are really what makes the live scene and the local scene what it is and live. So we're all, I know I speak for at least most local artists when I say, we really can't thank you guys enough.
On behalf of Capital Groove Collective, with the artists that are on board, we all feel the same. We're all very flattered. We'd like more of it, but we really appreciate all that we get.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Are there any local publications or other locally produced podcasts or any other kind of local media that you listen to as part of engaging with the media of the local scene?
Yeah, I actually was fortunate enough when I first sort of started this project. When I released my first 3 singles, I was interviewed for Experience Frederick and What is Frederick, which are 2 online blogs. And I live up in Frederick now. I originally lived down in Moco. And that's where I started when I was performing music. So I have a really deep connection with the DC music scene. And actually my first 3 gigs that I had for Mahogany Bees, all 3 of them were in Adams Morgan. So I absolutely plan on going back once things settle down. And I very much look forward to playing in DC many, many more times. So
from my perspective, especially, DC is representative of itself, but it also has a major contribution from Northern Virginia, Frederick and Baltimore, Southern Maryland. They're all really hodgepodge as part of the DC music community. What do you think is so special about how we're all gathering together and then reinvigorating each other with our music? And it's kind of regional to me, not necessarily exclusively city-based.
Exactly. And that's honestly the beautiful thing about it. And I think a big part of that is how easy it is to get to DC with the metro and all the different highways and things like that. It makes it really easy for someone like me who lives northwest of Frederick to get down and play a show in front of, people that aren't even from my city. And I played with a guy who was from Baltimore at one of the shows I played in Adams Morgan. So he drove from Baltimore. I came from Frederick, but we were meeting in DC. And I think that's one of the cool things that makes the DC scene always really interesting to me. Is you're absolutely right. It is like a conglomeration of all of these different groups coming from different areas to DC. Of course, you have the DC proper natives, respect to those guys. But I've never lived in the city myself, but I've spent every weekend down there for I don't even know how long. So it's always really cool to see quote unquote outsiders such as myself go down and connect with people and connect with the DC natives through music. Because no one, when you're on stage, no one is like, oh, that guy's from Frederick, he's a poser. You know, they're just there experiencing the music with you, and it's really quite an awesome experience.
But Frederick has a very unique music scene and a very close-knit music community as well.
Oh, 100%. In fact, it's bittersweet because I moved up to Frederick about a year ago from Montgomery County, and it was right at the beginning of when COVID hit. So I had my 3 shows back to back, and they were all in DC around the December, January time. And then I had 3 more gigs in downtown Frederick that unfortunately all got canceled because of COVID. So, but I'm already really good friends with one of the venue owners, Cafe Nola, shout out. And I really am looking forward to playing at a couple of the other clubs up in downtown Frederick. But it's a really, really cool scene. Different from DC, but different isn't always a bad thing. You get a variety. So I'm really excited to jump in all the way when it comes to playing in downtown Frederick very often.
It's a great town. So tell us a little bit about your story. You said that you had kind of started in Montgomery County, made your way to Frederick. What is your timeline, your story that brings you all the way from starting as a musician and to where you are now?
So long story short, I started off with guitar. I was exceptionally terrible at it. So I stuck with it. I got some lessons. And the thing is, even though I was really bad at it, I knew that it was something that I loved. Playing an instrument, participating in creating music, it filled a hole in my soul, I guess. I know that's cheesy, but it's the absolute truth. And eventually I found my main weapon of choice, which is the bass guitar. So I am a bassist. If I had to label myself one way or the other, that is my primary instrument. Took a bunch of lessons for bass, and then I just joined as many bands as I could as a bassist. And I played in Baltimore, I played in Montgomery County, I played in Northern Virginia. And I was in a variety of different bands covering everything from like the high school pop punk phase to this extremely fun band, which was very much experimental. And it was called Hybrid Baby. And it was a 3-piece, drummer, a singer who also played the synth, and then myself on bass. And I kind of had to cover the sonic territory of bass and guitar, which led me to where, and then there were a couple more stops along the way, but eventually I got to where I am with Mahogany Bees, and I play an instrument that is essentially a cross between a bass and a guitar, and I fill both roles on stage with the use of a looper and some sneaky EQing techniques. But I've been playing in all these bands ever since around 2010 is when I first started playing in bands and playing shows. And I love it. I love it. But this pandemic actually sort of pushed me to pursue another goal that I've always had, which is to create music that is entirely from myself. So no other creative influences, no other people whispering in my ear. So I used the pandemic, since we obviously couldn't have band practice, so I used that time to start the solo project. So Mahogany Bees is a solo project, and the intention of Mahogany Bees was to push myself to make music that is 100% me, from my heart, from my soul, and talking about stuff that is my personal life experience. So it's really been a great vessel for that. And this first album, which is actually finished, I'm literally mixing the last song right now, was a little poppy, and that was a genre I've never ever done before. And it was fun. It was definitely fun. There's a lot of songs on it that I really love. But the second album, which I'm starting in January, is going to be a little bit weirder. And it's going to have some heavy shoegaze elements. So, which is a little bit more my, like, from a musical's perspective, that's the weird shoegaze out there sort of musical vibe is definitely where my core of my foundation for my music comes from. So I'm going to be getting back to my roots a little bit more with the second album. So I'm really excited about that too.
What's your timeline for something like that? You just dropped, like I said earlier, like 9 singles in 2020, right? So
Yeah.
are you like ready to churn out, another
Yep.
album?
Yes. Yep. I've already started writing. I've already started working on different tones and different sounds, and so I'm very excited for this next album. So it's already in the works, you could say, technically.
That's great.
And the first song for that, I mean, if you're talking about a specific timeline, the first song for the second album will drop in January.
Okay, so you've got right into the transition to go into the full length like collection of all of these singles, compromising your first album, and then
Correct.
And then just start to lay out a new one. Are you trying to do one every month, or?
That's how it's worked out. It wasn't like a set schedule or anything like that. When I first started, that's how it turns out my workflow speed is. Typically it takes about a month for me to write, record, and mix a song.
That's a pretty awesome like opportunity to be able to do that, during this time. Is it translating into, like listenership and like meeting a lot of new people and new experiences as a result of working through these albums?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. No, I've met people who like my music who I've never even met before, and I wouldn't have met them if it wasn't for my music. So that's absolutely true. Yeah. And it's very cool because it's allowing me to also meet other bands that would fit with the vibe of Mahogany Bees, because you're not going to put like a metalcore band with a folk band on a gig necessarily on the same gig. So it's allowing me to meet other musicians that are doing this style of music that I'm doing, whereas most of the time before I was meeting experimental artists or metal artists or punk or grunge artists. So like I got to play with a jazz jam band at one of the gigs I played in Adams Morgan, and they were the coolest people ever. And in fact, I liked them so much that I actually reached out to the singer, and the singer and I collaborated on a song for Mahogany Bees, which is on the first debut album.
And that was November.
Yeah, exactly. So that was particularly cool as well.
Very cool. Yeah, absolutely. I was going to ask a little bit about, who in the local area is complementing the kind of music that you're producing, and obviously you're collaborating with people, which is, a beautiful thing to see.
Yeah. And there's actually a guitarist who I was very good friends with years and years and years ago. And he and I kind of went separate ways. He lives in Ohio now. But I'm not exaggerating when I say he is one of the best guitarists I've ever met or heard or anything like that. So he's actually going to be playing on one of the songs in the second album. And then there's another electronic artist called Mr. And he is just so good and definitely on the more avant-garde side of things, which is what I want the second album to have a little bit more of. So he and I are going to be working together. And then there is a rapper actually from Frostberg. So he and I are going to be working together. So it's going to be different vibes, different characters coming together, and it should make for an eclectic album. And I'm so excited. But none of those people I would have worked with if it wasn't for Mahogany Bees. So
you had mentioned that you work in a studio. Have you been able to keep any work, I guess, like income, right? Like in addition to all of the artistic endeavors, right? Like, are you heavily impacted by the pandemic?
Everybody is. Yes, we are, as well as the rest of the country. It has been a tough year, but we are remaining optimistic, and the music industry as a whole has taken a huge hit. Everything from live music to the general drop of available disposable income for musicians. for them to spend at a place like a recording studio. So all of these things have come into play, and made it hard for us, but hopefully we're still here. So we're hoping to make it through to the other side, and we're staying optimistic and staying positive and staying safe. And that's really, honestly, I think one of the biggest factors as well. But most of my own recording and mixing I actually do from home. But since I work at a studio, I get helpful information from my engineers, and they help me with recommendations for gear and making sure my setup is at least semi-professional instead of your typical bedroom setup. But that being said, these bedroom setups are, if people have the time and the commitment, they can make a Grammy-winning album on a laptop with GarageBand. So it's possible. It just takes the commitment.
It's very true, but I don't know if you should be encouraging everybody. Then there'll be just more music out there.
True. You know what? No, I think that more music is always a good thing.
Absolutely.
I don't think there's anything wrong with some competition. And frankly, I'd much rather hear lots of new music than a lot of the same stuff over and over again. So
how did you come into
new music is a beautiful thing.
How did you come into studio engineering as well as being a musician? Do you think that those things are eventually requirements as you gain experience, or?
No, absolutely not. I mean, it can definitely help, but for me, I knew I wanted to do something professionally in the music industry, but I was, frankly, I was young and scared, and I didn't want to try to make a living and have a house and, support a family on a musician performance income. So I decided to look into the audio engineering side as a formal, a stable form of income, which would also supplement my ability to record and mix myself, and I wouldn't have to rely on other people to accomplish a creative vision. So it's more of that was honestly the biggest inspiration, but it's definitely not a requirement to know the technology or anything like that in order to be successful. I would say nowadays more and more artists are able to do that, and they are looking into recording and mixing themselves just because the availability of the hardware and the software, it's so easy to get that stuff now. So they're able to use that. And then of course, through things like YouTube tutorials, they're able to learn how to use it. So the accessibility of this technology is greater than it's ever been. And I do think that's a beautiful thing. I do.
Absolutely. Who would you say are some of your inspirations or some of your influences? Maybe you could partition this as from a bassist perspective, but also as a songwriter, if there's, a difference there.
From a songwriter standpoint, I would say Daniel Johnston is by far my biggest influence. Hi, How Are You was a really big album for me. So his story is beautiful too. His whole life story is really, really beautiful to me. So I really like Daniel Johnston. As a general songwriting standpoint, and then from a thematic standpoint, I really like Postal Service. And then from a more musical standpoint, a lot of the sounds I'm using, at least in this first album, come from lo-fi, as well as some it's lo-fi and the emo rap, as people are labeling it. So people like Lil Peep, some of the things he sings about. Juice WRLD was a really big inspiration for some of my songs. So it's kind of a combination of all these different elements that have created Mahogany Bees. Lots of inspiration from very, very different sources. And from a bass player standpoint, my two big guys are James Jamerson and Flea from Red Hot Chili Peppers. So
is there anybody
I don't see too much of those guys popping up in the album yet, at least.
Working your way there?
Yeah.
Get
that's
the
right.
7 circles to your heroes being on your record.
That's exactly right. That would, yes. And that's actually another thing I'm looking to doing as well, bringing a little bit more funk, a little bit more energy. And then of course, Flea was known for his for being a little weird, and I love that. So I think I'm going to incorporate more of that as well. Mm-hmm.
Are there any DC musicians that you would consider like influences or idols?
um, in terms of modern artists, I would say someone like um the Vibes. I'm a big fan of. They're a local group. They're very cool. I'm good friends with the singer and the guitarist, and they have a really good energy. And I've actually gotten to play a show with them in Adams Morgan, and it was a wonderful experience. People were up, they were dancing, they were feeling the music. And to me, it's more about the experience when it comes to doing a live show. It's not necessarily as much about what is being played, who is there, what the message is necessarily. It's about the feeling. If people are enjoying the music and the feeling and they're having a good time, that's honestly one of the big important factors to me. And the Vibes did a wonderful job of translating that in their live performance. So check them out if you haven't.
Honestly, it's more of a short list now. Who am I unfamiliar with? I mean, even see, I know of you in as being a contributor in other bands. So I don't. It's like I've kind of gotten an introduction to Mahogany Bees, which is
Mhm.
awesome. But it's like my familiarity with you though comes from you just being in the scene and keeping on doing your thing.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing. I will play live music until the day I die or I can't move anymore. So whichever one comes first. But I want to be I want to I want to play as much as I can for as long as I can with as many different people as I can.
That's a good life.
Mhm.
Do you have
Yeah,
any
that's my measure of success.
a long life
That's
with a
definitely
lot of
my
music
measure of
out there?
success. Yep. Yes. Yes. Mhm.
Do you have any audio engineers that are like people you look up to in the field?
Oh, yeah, some of my coworkers. I mean, Scotty O'Toole, he's been recording music for forever, and he's kind of my go-to guru when it comes to anything. Um, like, hey, Scotty, I'm trying to get this really specific guitar tone. How do I, what are some tips to help me reach that tone? Or, okay, Scotty, I got this new microphone. Where is a good starting point in terms of placement in front of the amp? So he's definitely one of my go-to guys for knowledge. His mixes and recordings are just out of this world. So Scotty's my man. He's the best. He's a really good friend to have and an awesome resource. So I definitely utilize that a lot. And in terms of, it's so funny. I mean, my tastes are, I guess, all over the place, but another engineer slash producer I'm a huge fan of is actually Dr. Dre. Um, his records just sound really, really good to me. And that's what I kind of grew up listening to. And I have a feeling a lot of that has influenced some of my sounds that I have in my own music nowadays.
That's awesome. Uh, Outside of music, is there any other like artistic endeavors that you have or like creative? Do you have any other like creative outlets that you're exploring?
Well, I really, really love painting. Painting is one of my favorite things, and whittling, which is like wood carving essentially. But to be completely honest, I'm busy enough to a point where I don't have really any time to pursue those other interests. And any free time that I do have is all music. Like I I literally spend all of my free time doing music. So I don't even watch as much TV anymore as or anything like that like I used to. I mean, I made some time to watch The Mandalorian, very worth it. But otherwise it's all music. So
Does your passion for painting play it all into the artwork that you put together for your songs?
I wish I made all of them in Canva, believe it or not. So I made them all in Canva, and then the actual logo, the bee itself, is from an artist on Fiverr. So there wasn't a local artist in Frederick I wanted to use, but they stopped taking commissions, so I wasn't able to.
So no other hobbies. You did finish The Mandalorian, but no, if you don't have time for your other artistic endeavors, you probably don't have time for other hobbies.
Right. I actually play I play in the Frederick Adult Hockey League, and we would typically have about a game a week. So I was doing that religiously up until the pandemic hit. So I will be getting back into that again once the league opens back up. So I definitely do that. Which would be considered a hobby, certainly.
It counts.
Yeah. So I definitely was playing hockey a lot, and I was skating a lot until I realized how old I am and totally blew out my hamstring skating one day. So I've kind of been taking a break from that too. But I mean, yeah, I do a couple different things, hockey, skating. I'm a semi-professional Pokemon card collector, so I do that as well. But I haven't been. That's a very expensive hobby, so I haven't been putting really much time into that, because any extra money I may or may not have goes towards music stuff anyway. So
Absolutely, but that's cool. I think I was maybe just a bit too old for Pokemon initially, so I caught up with it with my sister's interest.
Oh
Playing
yeah. Mhm.
Pokemon Stadium, I think as far back as N64.
That game was awesome. I
great.
played the heck out of that game back in the day. Yes,
But
sir.
I knew if I ever went down a card game collection situation, I was going to bring my house to ruin. So I stuck with
Yep.
replayable video games.
Smart man. Smart man. Yep.
Are there
That's the
any
way to go.
like social causes that you support or feel passionately about, or something that you think
Oh
needs
Lord.
more
I mean,
attention?
yeah, there's a ton. Right off the top of my head, anything that supports BLM. Um, Another equally important thing to me would be like LGBTQA plus rights. So any organization supporting the rights of those people is another important thing to me. Um, and then of course my wife and I are both vegan, so any animal rights, anything relating to animal welfare and animal rights is also important. But I mean, in this year, like if anything, it's come to show me just how important these social justice movements have become. Um, and as opposed to being a more passive supporter, I've started to become more actively involved in supporting organizations that I believe in. So yeah, that's that. And there's a couple other things, but those are the main ones for me right now.
What advice do you have for people who are kind of coming to the same realization, trying to figure out how to split their time and energy in a variety of important causes?
Are you talking about in regards to the supporting things you believe in, or just time management wise?
I mean, in general, I think that the internet brought us to a spot, and this year brought us to a spot where our awareness of things that
Right.
where things, whether it's because social media only provides room for X, or because there are so many things that need people to show up for, and you can't show up for everything.
Right.
I've got kids, so then immediately I'm like, well, can I take my kids to this?
Yeah, exactly. And one of the easiest but one of the most effective things you can do is to remember that you can vote with your dollar. So by shopping, from organizations that you believe in or companies that support causes that you believe in, is one way, but then also actively avoiding spending money at places that give that money to causes that go against what you believe in. So that's probably one of the easiest way. And of course, you do have to do some research in advance, but that's probably one of the most effective ways, because these companies a lot of their power comes from how much money they get. So if that starts to go away, their sway and their ability to enact these changes that you might not believe in dwindle. So that would be one good way. And then, of course, the other more passive way, I guess, would be to just do your research. I mean, make sure your sources of information are reliable, trustworthy. Make sure you're not buying into the hype, I guess, when it comes to various claims from different sources. You just got to make sure you're doing your research and reading as much as you can, because there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and it's really hard to make a decision or to support a company or support a cause if you're not fully informed. So that's definitely another big factor, certainly.
That's awesome. That's great advice, and certainly for people to be patient to try to find, the organizations and the companies that, they want to support, that reflect their objectives and the things they feel passionate about.
100%.
I find that the DC scene provides a lot of different outlets for, things like you said, like researching who is supporting who, and in making sure that your money is going to things like locally grown foods and supporting local businesses. Do you have any specific local businesses that you really like inside of DC or inside of Frederick?
Specifically in DC, in Adams Morgan, there's a place called Spacey Cloud Lounge. They are a bar, a restaurant, a feminist art space, a skate park, all of it. They are so cool, but they are huge advocates for women's rights, LGBTQA plus rights. They're huge BLM supporters, and they're just a really good space, and they are managed by very good people. I've personally met the owner many times. She is a fantastic person, and does a lot of good for the community, honestly. So they're probably my favorite in DC, one of my favorites in DC. I mean, there's so many organizations there, but Spacey Cloud Lounge is like a boots on the ground, actively trying to make change for the good of people. So I have a lot of respect for them and what they do.
Thanks for sharing that. I'm unfamiliar with them, so I'll have to check them out.
The food's really kick butt too, honestly. It's really tasty. They got a lot of good vegetarian and vegan options. So
very cool.
Very good.
Yeah, my wife and I are trying to commit to lacto-ovo vegetarianism.
Cool.
So we are making adjustments pretty significantly. And
well, it's getting easier every year too. More and more companies are coming out with alternatives or, plant-based things, and it's it's a great time to get into the plant-based stuff, because it's totally crazy how many more options there are. Back when I first switched, which was in like 2008, 2009. So there's way more options now. So it's a good time to get into it.
Do you like to dabble, or do you like to stick with some of the traditional tried and true, like meat substitutes?
If it was left up to me, I would have I would stick to like what I know, and it would be a very boring diet. But fortunately, my wife is all about trying new things, trying new recipes. Every week she's bringing home a new brand, a new company of a new product. So, thanks to her, I eat a lot of really cool stuff that I wouldn't have necessarily.
I think we're just about out of time. I wanted to thank you, Nick, for coming on and being a part of the podcast, and for being my guinea pig for my first official interview for CGC Presents DC Music Rocks.
Yeah, and thank you so much. Thank you so much. I mean, like I said in the beginning, what you're doing, and by supporting local musicians such as myself, you are really making a big difference. Because now I can show this to my fans and potentially get some new fans out of it. And you are actively contributing to my growth as a musician. And that's honestly the best thing you can do for a musician. So I very much thank you for that. And thank you to CGC, of course.
It's a pleasure for all of us. Is there anything that you'd like to tell us about Don't Think That's the track that you shared with us that I hope that we'll get to shout out and share with a lot of new potential listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. The inspiration for this song was it's commentary on the internal dialogue you have when someone is dealing with a stressor or a traumatic event. It's that internal conflict that you want to address that problem head on and think about it and actively go through the mess. Want to not think about it and just sort of forget and forgive and move on. So it's down to those two conflicts, which I experienced a lot of back in the day. So that song is about that.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. You can follow DC Music Rocks and Capital Groove Collective at Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. And to find out more about our guests, our news, initiatives, or applying to be featured on our podcast, visit our website at capitalgroovecollective.com. That's capital with an O. This is Daniel Warren Hill for CGC Presents DC Music Rocks, and you are listening to Nick Springer of Mahogany Bees and his song, Don't Think.
Come back when you're missing. I don't know anymore. I don't. Come back when you're sober. I can't care for you. This dream that I'm living keeps me up at night, Don't think, don't worry, don't think, don't worry, don't think, don't worry, don't think. This story